Welcome to the Expert Series, where we explore the issues shaping Canadian national security and defense. I'm Gabriella Picton, Research Assistant at the CDA Institute. Today, we meet with Tom Rostoks, Directors at the Center for Security and Strategic Research at the National Defense Academy of Latvia. Through a conversation on Latvia's evolving security posture, we explore what Canada can learn from the Baltics regarding collective defense readiness for future conflicts. This is the Expert Series. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Expert Series. We have a fantastic discussion ahead of us today, covering how and why Latvia and fellow Baltic states have emerged as the center of Europe's new defense posture. Latvia and other Baltic states are at the head of the curve in Europe when it comes to deterring Russian aggression. Part of what has made this possible is taking a total defense policy approach, which combines military and civilian defense preparedness to ensure whole of society readiness for future conflicts. Can you start by speaking a bit about what this looks like in the Latvian context specifically?
Yes, sure. I'll be glad to. I think that the origins of Latvia's current approach go back to 2014 when Russia took Crimea, and it was clear at that point that Russia represented a threat to its neighbors, but it wasn't just a military threat. Although military component was really significant. But it was also clear that Russia had managed to penetrate Crimea not just through military means, but otherwise as well. And it was also clear that Russia's approach went far beyond just using military means. Russia used the whole range of foreign policy instruments against Ukraine. So Russia's coercion had the Secret Service part of it. It had disinformation, bribery, and all kinds of elements. So we understood that if Russia one day would decide to go against the Baltic states, this is what we would be up against. And as the result, the successive Latvian governments have decided that it is obviously necessary to ramp up defense spending. Because back in 2014, Estonia was spending about 2% of its GDP on defense, but Latvia and Lithuania were not. Our defense spending hovered around 1%. The legacy of the economic crisis that we had experienced earlier. But there were other measures that had to be taken as well. So disinformation had to be addressed in a serious manner, and all kinds of other ways in which Russia might try to coerce us. So this is clearly what we had to address. So defending against Russia, and also given the size of our countries, so the Baltic states combined are just about 6 million people. So if we would have to stand up against Russia, it would have to be the whole society effort, and there was just no way around it. Our approach to total defense or comprehensive national defense, as we call it in Latvia, was born out of these considerations.
I'm glad that you have highlighted the fact Russian aggression in this context comes not just from military means, but from other means and other sorts of threats below the threshold of conventional military operations, specifically disinformation and others you've mentioned. And as we also know, these don't just penetrate the government, military of Latvia and other countries, but society as well. So I'm hoping in light of this, you can speak a bit about what the most successful strategies for enhancing social resilience amongst citizen populations in Latvia have been? And have there been any trade offs necessary to ensure that the Latvian public supports strong foreign and security policies?
Yeah, the societal dimension is very, very complex, and we have from Soviet Union we inherited a relatively divided society, a peaceful society, but nevertheless a society that has very different views about foreign security and defense issues. So, for example, in Latvia, we have about 36, 7 or 38% of people who live in households where Russian language is used as means of communication. And this is the strongest predictor of people's views on a variety of defense and security related issues. So, despite the fact that the Latvian part of population strongly supports Latvia's EU and NATO membership, strongly supports higher defense spending. I mean, well, we just did a public opinion poll last year, and um, I think the question back then was about Latvia spending at least 3% of GDP on defense. Eventually, it will be higher than that, but more than half of the whole pool of respondents supported higher defense spending. But then the part of society which is Russian speaking, they are more hesitant about NATO and the presence of NATO troops in Latvia as well. They are more sympathetic to Russia. So giving Russia the benefit of the doubt, you could say. So they don't support higher defense spending as well, and on a whole range of issues. These two parts of our society have views that are very different. But having said that, things have changed a great deal since 2014, and then of course since 2022. Let's say we know from public opinion polls that the Russian speaking part of society has become uh, less negative about Latvia's NATO membership, also less negative about the presence of NATO troops in Latvia, and also to some extent less negative about higher defense spending. So we are witnessing these significant changes in our society. But I think there's one thing that really helps. One might say resilience, although kind of the concept of resilience itself is rather contentious. I mean, it's clear that resilience is about being able to bounce back when it comes to societies and to keep functioning in the face of adversity. But at the same time, um, societies and governments don't really know how resilient they will be in case something really bad would happen. So it's hard to measure resilience before something terrible happens. So there are clearly limits in that regard. But one thing that really helps us is proximity to Russia. Also, having clear government policy from day one. The policy has been very, very critical towards Russia, and there's a visible presence of Ukraine in Latvia. So government buildings they also fly Ukrainian flags. That also applies to schools and universities, hospitals, what have you. So the presence of Russia's aggression against Ukraine actually never went away since 2014, even when the active phase of the military conflict ended in 2015. I mean, there were casualties and shootings and what have you since then, but the active phase ended in around 2015. But the issue of Russia's aggression against Ukraine never went away from our information space. Media were constantly reporting on what was happening in Ukraine. Russia's foreign policy was a key focus for our media in Latvia. Um, so. Um, so I would say that perhaps we sometimes have better understanding simply because we pay attention a little bit more, and we pay attention because we absolutely have to. There's no other way for us. So it's the necessity that gives us a pretty good understanding of what's going on in Ukraine. It gives us a good understanding of what Russia represents in its foreign policy. Um, and of course, also being a small country, we look around and we're paying attention to what's going on in other NATO member states and what NATO's policy is and how that has changed over the years. So that kind of provides that deep societal background for our understanding of what's going on.
I'm hoping we can now look at the other side of this dimension of whole of society readiness instead of civilian preparedness specifically, looking at government preparedness as well. In light of statistics you'd mentioned discussing the evolution of Latvians' views towards NATO membership and other models of defense preparedness, I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit on have Latvia's government officials and leadership made citizens understand the need to deter conflict preemptively better in recent years? And can the implementation of conscription for mandatory military service help achieve this if it hasn't been achieved already?
Yeah, well, building resilient societies takes years and probably decades. Latvia indeed switched back to conscription in the aftermath of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But we should keep in mind that Estonia never gave up on conscription, and Lithuania went back to conscription in 2015. So Latvia's decision was a bit late. One might say that we could have done that earlier, perhaps. And indeed, we always compare us to our neighbors. Uh, uh, so yeah, in that regard, the government had to endure some criticism from the public as well. And of course, it's not like people want conscription just for the sake of having conscription, but then society was a bit divided on whether we have to return to conscription or not, and then we clearly got used to liberties that we and freedom that we had since 2006 when we gave up on conscription. But I think that conscription really is a key component here, but it's not the only one. Actually, since 2018, Latvian authorities started to put in place the so-called national security curriculum in secondary schools, in high schools. It was at the time intended as the substitute for conscription. It was like, well, we don't do conscription. We're not going back to that, but we will have this national security curriculum introduced in schools. And actually, since last year, that national security curriculum has become mandatory in all schools. It was run as a pilot project before, but since last year, it's mandatory because eventually you just have to reach people, and if you want to inform them about Latvia's security and defense needs and the peculiar situation that we are in with Russia as our neighbor and Russia waging the war of aggression against Ukraine. Reaching people is somewhat difficult. It can be partly done through mass media, TV, and other programs. But then, of course, kind of to have a deeper impact, you need to have people who are prepared. And for example, the latest state defense concept, which was adopted in 2023, I think, it speaks about the culture of readiness, meaning that we simply have to be ready. Bad things might not happen after all, and NATO deterrence might hold, but we can't just take it for granted. It's not 100% certainly that bad things will not happen. Deterrence may fail for whatever reasons, and miscalculations in the Kremlin. So we must be ready. But this is very much a work in progress because building a society that's ready to stand up against aggression, it takes decades to build. I mean, Finland has often been singled out in these discussions as a country from which others might learn from. But then the comprehensive security system in Finland, it took time to build, and that will be, I think, very similar in our case as well. So that eventually there will be lots of initiatives like this comprehensive national security curriculum, and then conscription as well. There's a lot of interest on part of the public as well. There are companies that are interested in how they can contribute. Municipalities must be involved, and of course, when you look around and assess, when we look around and when we assess our vulnerabilities, we can see that the system of civil defense had been neglected for decades, basically. But then, in recent few years, governments and municipalities have taken up this task, and they have tried to figure out, well, if if our cities come under missile attacks, where are the bomb shelters? How many people can they provide with shelter and so on? And so eventually, it's bit by bit, but people start looking at a lot of things through this lens of security, and I think that this is the aim, and we're progressing in that regard.
Keeping this culture of readiness in mind, in what domains does Latvia anticipate facing the largest military threat from Russia in the near future? Has it shifted any procurement strategies or national defense industry priorities as a result?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, one procurement priority is that we should procure more of pretty much everything, apart from things that we cannot afford, simply. But I think that we have. I mean, we did join NATO, and it took an effort to do that. But once we joined NATO, the military was still to some extent neglected, and defense spending was always lagging. One could say. So back in 2014, it was clear that we have to ramp up defense spending, and basically, whatever it is that we do, it will have some positive effect because there were gaps everywhere and shortcomings and shortfalls. I think that since 2022, we have tried to learn from the ongoing war in Ukraine, and there's been significant investment in artillery systems and ammunition, also rocket-propelled artillery, and air defense, which we used to think that air defense is so expensive that we simply cannot afford it, but eventually we must be able to afford it. So we're procuring air defense systems as well, not just short range, but also medium range air defense systems. So obviously, Patriot systems are we are out of reach financially, and this is where we also look towards what our allies could contribute. But we're trying to lead by example in this regard, so that we're taking our security seriously. We are among countries that spend the most on defense, and then of course we also expect our allies to help us and strengthen NATO deterrence in this region. And then of course there's been a lot of interest in how drones could be used to thwart military aggression against Latvia. And Latvian Defense Minister Anders Prūs has taken the lead in that regard. He's trying to build this drone coalition, international coalition, and with rising defense budgets, there's a lot more room for Latvian defense industry as well, because the defense ministry and the government in general just not willing to simply send a lot of money abroad by procuring things that we need. But as much as possible, we would like to have our own defense industry, and our taxpayers and people benefiting from this. So these would be jobs and new business opportunities as well. So this has clearly been a trend in recent years. But then, of course, there's the further we go, and as we are perhaps at a moment where the end of the war in Ukraine is no longer such a distant possibility, but it might happen in 2025 or 2026. We're also looking at other things. So how else can we strengthen our national defense? And unfortunately, one of the ways to do that is with the help of landmines as well. So Latvia has been a signatory of the Ottawa Convention, so anti-personnel landmines, and together with other two Baltic states and I suppose Poland, and quite recently there was a statement by the Finnish president as well. So we have evaluated that, and we have come to the conclusion that we would also need anti-personnel landmines at our disposal if the worst were to happen. Unfortunately, this does not bode well for let's say the international rules-based order, because we are kind of we're undermining that to a certain extent, but that is a logical consequence of our national security and defense needs.
Procurement strategies, defense industry buildup, and defense and military relations are one of many areas that have been changing in recent weeks due to shifts in the Transatlantic Security Alliance. Can you elaborate a bit on how Latvia is handling the new US administration's posture towards Europe? And have the Baltics been impacted differently than other regions or countries within the continent?
Yeah, we have watched the events of unfolding over the past 2 months and several weeks with great concern. Of course, um, our foreign minister, and the whole foreign ministry and the whole government are working hard to make sure that whatever happens in relations between United States and Europe more broadly or between United States and some of its allies, such as Canada or Denmark, that are being particularly targeted by the present U.S. government. Our aim still is to make sure that NATO as an alliance still remains. And that is, I believe that should be our collective aim, because whatever turbulence we are experiencing at this point, it might not be forever. And whichever way you look at the present, at the current US president, uh, this is Donald Trump's presidency might be regarded as a turning point, or in about 20 or 30 years, with the benefit of hindsight, it could also be seen as an aberration. So, so our aim is to make sure that the transatlantic alliance still works to some extent, and I believe that we had NATO not just because it was so nice to have this alliance, but because the United States had a real security interest in Europe, although the current administration does not necessarily see it that way. The signals that we have received regarding the Baltic security have been quite positive. I'm not sure if it will be possible to keep, let's say, U.S. Policy towards the Baltic region and Poland, and to some extent the Nordic countries as well, whether it will be possible to keep it kind of separate from turbulence in relations between United States and Europe more broadly, because the current U.S. administration clearly uh, looks at clearly has Greenland in its sights, and it would have repercussions for the alliance. There's been heavy criticism towards the EU and Germany as the biggest economy in the EU, and we are concerned that the let's say the drift in economic relations and the turbulence there might have implications in the security realm as well. But we're also very glad that, given the circumstances, our European allies have stepped up. And although it's hard to compensate for shortfalls in the U.S. Military capabilities in the short term, and the U.S. military power is essential for enabling European military capabilities. But we think that in the medium to long term, our security might be served in a positive way, because we may eventually end up with militarily strong two pillars within NATO. So the North American pillar used to be strong already, and if we have a more powerful and militarily capable European pillar, that will be good for our security as well. So we may come out stronger as the result of this. But then, of course, there's also the possibility, which is no longer a theoretical possibility, that the transatlantic alliance may not survive the ongoing turbulence. That's a possibility, and we treat that seriously. But of course, I think that with regard to the Baltic states, the current U.S. administration has pursued a relatively responsible approach. I mean, military assistance has been approved in March this year by this administration, not just previous one. So that's a positive signal. And whatever economic pressure is put in place against Europe, we still hope that the U.S. involvement in northeastern Europe would remain quite strong.
As a result of these recent shifts in the relationship with the United States and the rest of NATO, do you anticipate that Latvia will look to deepen ties with other NATO allies like Canada? And in the Canadian case specifically, or more generally across the alliance, are there any specific avenues you'd like to highlight where you think this might be able to take place?
We even before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we were in the process of deepening our defense and military cooperation with other like-minded NATO member states, specifically in northern and central Europe. And the Joint Expeditionary Force led by United Kingdom is a good example in that regard. So that initiative has has functioned for already a number of years, and it can have a very positive impact on our security in those circumstances where NATO Article 5 has not yet been sort of called upon, but as the crisis unfolds, NATO member states can act. There's no prohibition against that, and let's say putting forces into place, moving ships closer to the potential theater. Those are all things that can be done well in advance. So we've been already doing this for many years. Um, then since 2022, there's definitely more cooperation in terms of defense industry. Latvian companies are trying to find their place in supply chains for larger Nordic European military companies. And then regarding Canada, I think that it's very much up to Canadians, right? Because for many years, Canadian experts have tried to call out their government of not spending sufficiently on defense, while at the same time, Canada was making and it is making major contribution to security of the Baltic region and therefore to security of Europe more broadly. And it is that contribution and that support that we appreciate so much. And after 2022, Canada stepped up in a major way. So the the size of Canadian deployment has uh, to Latvia has grown manyfold, is tripled, quadrupled, or more. I mean, eventually, there will be about 2,200 Canadian troops. So that's a significant contribution, but at the same time, we are also trying to build on the on one of the particular characteristics of the enhanced forward presence, what used to be a battle group, but will be a brigade. It's the multinational character of that brigade, and since 2022, there's been greater Danish military presence in Latvia. Also, once Sweden became a member of NATO, and actually they announced this before they became a NATO member, that there will be a reduced Swedish battalion deployed to Latvia as well. So this is very much the setting in Latvia, and it's good to have so many allies coming forward and being involved. But then also understanding the particular challenges that the Canadian government will face after the election eventually. Um, uh, the expectation would still be that that Canada would continue its contribution to Baltic security, and I think the main thing would be for Canada to be able to increase its contribution. So if there's eventually is a serious crisis, then the impression that we had, at least until recently, was that Canada makes a significant contribution, but we can't really ask for more beyond that. But if there's eventually a military conflict, then it would make sense for Canada to have that, more substantial military capability so that it can support its own troops in the Baltic theater and replenish those troops or replace them during a conflict. So that is something that successive Canadian governments might want to think about, and also in terms of equipment as well, because there's been no shortage of publications in Canadian media outlets about certain shortcomings, either in terms of ammunition or individual equipment, soldiers' equipment. So there have been shortcomings, and those would need to be addressed.
Touching on a number of different factors that you have mentioned, most of all defense industry buildup at the national level, as well as building new relationships and alliances with NATO partners in Europe and elsewhere. Do you ultimately see the Baltic states becoming the drivers of NATO's defense posture in the years to come? If so, why? And what can other NATO allies like Canada learn from their approach?
Well, I believe that there are a couple of things that other allies can learn. Although ultimately, it's a collective endeavor. It is This is something that we do together, and it would. I don't think it would even be good if 3 countries, 6 million people would become drivers of the whole alliance, which combines a population of almost 1 billion people. So being drivers in that case, that would not sound even right. I think that what we where we want to be is where all NATO member states make adequate contributions, where they take security concerns of other allies very, very seriously. And when those concerns arise, those are addressed. I mean, for so many years, our security concerns weren't really addressed the way we wanted them to be addressed. But looking at uh, those dimensions where we might make a positive contribution, I think the Baltic states are an example that things can be done quickly. Because so often in defense-related debates in other NATO member states, you hear these arguments that, okay, we will increase our defense spending, but it will be something like until year 2030 or 2035, and then the actual increase would be, moving from 2.3% on defense to 2.5 or 2.7%. And we offer proof that things can be done more quickly. And it was even I think it was 2015 when we had to make a decision in Latvia on how quickly we move towards 2% of GDP on defense. And I think the first idea that was that we would reach 2% in 2020. But that idea was eventually shelved. We decided to move faster. So we moved from 1% of GDP to 2% in just 4 years, basically. So that is possible. And even let's say, and then there was the COVID crisis. We had a slight economic recession, but that, as our prime minister at the time emphasized specifically, it would not affect defense spending. So you have less money, you have GDP contraction, you would have less money at government's disposal, but that would not affect defense spending. And then since 2022, we have moved fairly quickly. As circumstances change, we adjust, and it would be great to see more of that agility in other European capitals. Let's say in Germany, the first signals were very promising, but then things stalled a bit. And we hope that the new German government would move quicker in that regard. So I guess that's one of the areas where we might serve as an example, and the other area is involving the public uh, uh, in uh, in national defense. So the Baltic states have conscription at this point. We also know that across the border in Russia, they are going to have a military after the end of the war that will be larger than before the war. I mean, that military would have less tanks, less, armored personnel carriers and other, howitzers or what have you, but it will be a larger military. And Russia's defense industry is in full swing at this point. It's going at full speed. And it means that knowing that Russia is an actor that is able to pursue its foreign policy objectives at great cost. So it has lost, upwards of 500,000 of its troops in Ukraine, or 1,000,000. I mean, depending which numbers you use. But Russia is still pressing forward. And it means that in Europe, we would also need to address the issue of availability of military personnel. I'm not sure that all NATO member states would need to have conscription. That's not the issue. But then addressing the shortfalls in terms of military personnel should be a high priority for a lot of militaries. I mean, our militaries are good. Soldiers are well trained, our officers are well educated, and they are well equipped as well. But then, as attrition sets in, and we have seen in Ukraine that you need to have a military that's able and ready to fight, not just in the first week or the first month, but after 3 years, you might still need to be able to keep going, and that involves looking very carefully at these issues related to the availability of personnel.
We've reached the end of our questions for today, and we've covered a lot of really fantastic ground. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
We are in we live in interesting times, and there is so much uncertainty at this point, and it seems that that the sky is falling. Basically, I mean, so many things that we have taken for granted, they are being undermined at this point, or they have become obsolescent. But in such times, it makes sense to prepare for the worst, really. And it makes sense to have a plan, because that gives you something to work with. If we wait for deterrence to fail, we would we would have to pay a very, very high price for getting things back to normal, and for defending our countries and our way of life in Europe. So being prepared becomes a value in itself, and I think that you know societies and NATO member states and the political leaders as well would do well to be prepared and to work towards setting clear objectives in the realm of national security and defense, and pursuing them, even under great uncertainty, which, Russia's aggression has thrown European security into disarray, and United States policies may further contribute to instability that we face. But in such times, we need more visionary leadership. We need strong leadership, and we need to be prepared.
Well, thank you very much again for your time and perspective. As Canada increasingly seeks whole of society preparedness for conflicts that may be ahead, we know our listeners will certainly benefit from hearing the Latvian and Baltic model of doing so. We look forward to hosting you again soon. That brings us to the end of the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss an update. For more in-depth analysis and updates on national security and defense, be sure to visit our website, www.cdainstitute.ca, where you can find articles, reports, and more. Thank you for listening, and a big thank you to our guest, Tom's Rostoks. We hope you'll tune in next time. Take care.